As was mentioned, we're going to cover a few topics today, and we'll go into those in a minute. The three biggest things that we're going to be concerned with, at least the two biggest ones for today's seminar, are going to be accuracy and standardization. Speed is also important. You want to get your work done as efficiently and as quickly as possible. With the 2019 release of Bluebeam Revu, Revu is the product, Bluebeam is the company, they have greatly enhanced the speed. It's a little difficult to illustrate live, so I will just tell you a little bit about it. But when you work with the product, if you have worked with previous releases, you may be able to notice there is a significant difference. We'll talk about accuracy, some new features in terms of being able to calibrate, be automatically reminded if your file isn't calibrated, and some other input features that'll let you know what the scale is set to. And then standardization, the idea that you can reproduce the same kind of results over and over and over again with your markups and your takeoffs. So rather than having 10 people putting 10 different types of markups on the file, calling them 10 different things, making it very difficult for sorting and assigning costs and responsibilities to, we can set up a tool set that will be standardized that we can then export. So the first thing to illustrate with this slide that is moving on its own here, I have no idea how they did that, but it's an improved rendering engine in the software. Bluebeam says it's about 6 times faster than previous releases. Some people may find it even faster than that, depending on their particular machine. As you pan and zoom around in a file, it'll be less time involved in actually seeing that update. To possibly illustrate that, it's really hard to demonstrate because this isn't that big a file, but the images will sort of update fairly quickly. There's really almost no degradation in this particular release in reasonably sized files. Larger files with lots of hatch patterns that are very dense still take a little bit of time, but not as much as in the past. 3D files still take a fair amount of time to load, but again, as you move around in them, they are pretty efficient. Quantity takeoff, that's the most important things that you're going to be doing with the software. And as you are calculating areas, you will want to know that you are measuring things correctly. So I want to show you how that calibration works. Independent units, fantastic. If there's one reason to upgrade to this release, it is that. Imagine you are putting in areas, and in previous releases, that particular markup tool could have been square feet or could have been square yards, but can't be both. Well, so you had to go through all kinds of gymnastics in the markup list to get square yards to square feet or vice versa and figure out how to assign costs, and it was ugly. Now we can independently assign these values, store them in that markup so that when we use carpeting, for instance, we'll get square yards. If we do tile, we'll get square feet. I'm going to show you how to do that. And your running totals. You'll be able to see for different markups on the properties bar at the top, these individual totals for these. You can also see them in the markup list as well. So let me demonstrate that for you. I put these demo notes in here so I know not to move on before I actually show you what I'm talking about. So this particular file I'm in has a scale. I'm going to actually do a little bit of red marking on the screen. You can see down here at the bottom of the screen, it says that it's 12 inches equals a foot. Over here in the left-hand side of the screen in the file panel, in the thumbnails panel, we can see that this is set to 12 inches equals a foot. So 1 foot equals 1 foot. Well, that really isn't very accurate, right? This is 1/8 inch equals a foot. So when because this is already calibrated, I were to come over on the right-hand side and go to measure a distance or put in an area, that value is already in there. Well, I can go ahead in this particular file because I see right now that it's the wrong scale. I could come along here and say, well, I'm going to use a custom scale, and I'm going to say that I want to use, let's say, preset, and I'll go over to 1/8 inch equals a foot. If I can find it, there we go. So 1/8 inch equals a foot. I'm now set to the right scale. So if I came in here and were to measure a distance, for example, let's say from this point here to this point here, I will get the correct results, right? So I'm all set. I happen to notice that. But what if you don't happen to notice these settings? And by the way, if you've used previous releases of the software, this in the thumbnails panel, this value over here at the bottom is new. And that is a new setting that you can get to from the top of the bar by checking page scale. Uncheck it, it won't be there. Check it, it will be there. But if you have a file that isn't to scale and you're not aware of it, right? This one at this point, if I look at the bottom of the screen on the right-hand side, it says scale not set. For some reason, this came in and wasn't set. So I'm going to just check out the scale. 1 inch equals 30 feet. So if I were coming in to do a measurement in here and I didn't have that scale preset or wasn't aware of it, I might be putting in all kinds of dimensions and areas and things like that that were incorrect. And then in my markup list at the bottom, I'd be getting the wrong totals. Well, in this particular release, let's say I start the linear dimension tool, the length tool. I make my first pick. When I get over and make my second pick, the software says, wait a minute, not so fast. You really see how it says 0 right now? You're not really giving me enough information. So you can go ahead and calibrate. Calibrate would mean that measuring distance that I just picked on the screen, I have to tell it what the actual length is. Or I can use a preset or a custom scale. So at this point, I could say, hey, I want to use a preset scale. I can set that scale to 1 inch equals 30 feet. And I can say apply it. Now I can apply it. I can set my precision to inches, a quarters of an inch. I can apply it to my current page, or if I had multiple pages, I could apply it to multiple pages. As I go ahead and say apply the scale, that goes ahead and adjusts that value for me. So it's really important that those scale values are set before you do any kind of measuring in your file. So independent units would be next to talk about. Right now in this particular file, I have some rooms, and please don't comment about the poor person who didn't quite design that hallway to be the right width. I can't change it here. I'm really frustrated sometimes that I can't do that. But I have some things such as an area, right? So if I click on this and come over to properties, it says that that is an area measurement up here on the upper right. And if I click on the carpeting, it says that's an area measurement as well. But in this particular release, notice I'm getting square feet as well as square yards. So how does this happen? Well, when you go to put something in, it will have a default to start with. So for example, if I were to use my area tool, on the right-hand side, it's going to tell me how it's measuring. And right now, it's measuring in square feet. So that's what I would be setting it to. So if I go ahead and place that in there, I would get that value. Now, if I wanted square yards in the past in the markup list, I would have had to have a custom column that would allow me to very cumbersome fashion go through and find some custom column that would take square feet and divide it by a number to get me square yards. And is that number 9 or is that number 27 or is that right? And you have to, now you're doing math from what we've all forgotten. So we don't want to go through that, or cubic feet to cubic yards for concrete or footings, concrete footings or slabs. So in this release, what I can do is select that. And now up on the properties bar here at the top of the screen, I have an option called units. And when I click on that particular option, you'll notice that I can change the area of that to square yards if I want. That will not affect any of the other areas in the file, just this particular area. You'll also notice that I will get a total here of all the values of that particular item. So I can see very quickly that, oh, well, the volume is set to 0 cubic feet because there's no depth set. I can't actually set the depth here. I could do that either on the properties bar at the top or in the properties panel and come down and set some of those values down here, okay? Now, one of the problems, see where, let's make sure I've got those 3 items. Yes, so there we go. So those running totals, okay. Assign responsibilities in the markup list. I wanted to see standardizing. Okay, so we'll come back to standardizing with tool sets. I probably should put these slides in a slightly different order, but it is what it is. So assigning responsibility in the markup list would be the next thing I want to talk about. Let's say you've got different people that are working on a project, and let's say you want to, I'm going to go ahead and delete this guy, maybe not. So let's say we want to come down and assign values. Well, in the markup list, what I've done is I have created a custom column. Now, this custom column is called responsibility. You could call it anything you want. You can make up any name that works for your particular office. If you are creating custom columns, you have a couple of options with those. On the left, I have the Manage List dropdown, and I can go over to Columns and Manage Columns. We have standard columns, so all of the items listed here are standard, they're built in. There are a few listed as custom, but my custom columns are listed here. And you'll notice that I have created a bunch of custom columns, a whole bunch of numbers for my costs per square foot or square yard or item or linear foot, total costs as formulas. And then I added in this last one called responsibility. All of these custom columns that I have created apply only at this point to this file. If I am doing this on a regular basis, I could save this to my profile. Okay. So I'll digress for a second and talk about profiles. Your profiles up on the upper left allow you to reconfigure your screen, but they will also allow you to control what your markup list looks like. So for instance, if I'm doing takeoffs, maybe I want to store all of these columns in quantity takeoff, but if I'm doing field issues, I don't want all these values in there. So by creating these different profiles, I can save these different markups. So for my standardization purposes, I can very quickly standardize how I want to work in particular files, depending on what hat I'm wearing that day. If I'm out in the field, maybe I don't save these. I have a whole bunch of other custom columns that I'm saving or built-in columns. But if I'm currently doing quantity takeoff, maybe I do want these columns. Now, the responsibility column is as follows. I'm going to go over and click on it and modify it. But you have a whole bunch of type options. A check mark, pretty obvious. It's either checked or it's not. Date, the same thing. It'll read the date currently on your computer. Formula will allow you to multiply or add or divide or however you want to do it. Multiple columns that you've created. A number is just a valued sign, so maybe a cost per square foot. And text is just plain old text value. But the one I have chosen is choice. So for responsibility, I could just put in text, and then I would have to type someone's name in at least once, after which it would be available in the drop-down for me. But if I had someone else, I'd have to type their name in. And now I've got to remember exactly how to type their name. Maybe someone has an unusual spelling. Instead, I have a choice column, a choice type. Now that choice type allows me to add items. For instance, I will modify Bill, and I would put in an item name. But the thing that I tie the responsibility to is the subject. And if you notice over here in the markup list on the bottom left, I have subjects. When I put a markup in, the subject used for the markup is the name of the markup. I will show you that in a second. It is critical that that name, that subject name, be assigned a specific value, because I'm using that name to assign Bill to that particular subject. So you'll notice that Bill can only be picked from the subject called ceramic tile, as can Jim. They're our best tile layers. We don't want either of them to be doing carpeting, and vice versa. We don't want the carpet guys doing our tile work. So Dan and Roger are our carpeting guys, right? Name has to match. If the name doesn't match, we are not going to get the item associated with. Now me, I'm capable of doing ceramic tile and carpeting, so I don't put any subject in there. So let me go ahead and pick OK, OK, and I'll go ahead and drop that area in once more. Go ahead and pick here, and oops, let me do that one more time. This time I will hold down my left button, which I sometimes forget to do. You'll notice down here now that there is a subject called area measurement, right? So if I come over to area measurement and go to responsibility, the only person can do that, or the only thing I can assign is me, right? That's the only thing I can do. So I would have to come into here, double click, change this to ceramic tile. Now, as I start typing the letter C, I can select that. As soon as I do that, of course, it drops into ceramic tile. And now for responsibility, I can choose myself or Bill or Jim, right? If I came to carpeting, if I changed the name of that, maybe that should have been carpeting. I don't know why, but if I change that to carpeting, it'll move into the carpeting section. And now when I go to assign a responsibility to that, now it's Dan or Roger or myself, right? So the subject is really important. So we don't want to be using these tools just out of the box, right? We don't want to use these markup tools for areas and lengths and other kinds of things just out of the box, because if I'm doing that, I don't know if it's carpeting or tile, or I don't know if it is a length measurement for piping or electrical track lighting or whatever it is you are trying to keep track of, or maybe means of egress lengths. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this and show you how the better way to do that. So let me come back over here. So text or choice were your options for assigning in the markup list. What we really want to do is standardize. Standardizing with what are called tool sets. So tool sets will, there are some that ship, there are some download off of the Bluebeam website. But in your office, you are going to want to customize. You're going to want to set it up so that your markup tools look the way you want them to have the proper values in terms of the subject name, and maybe you also would like to have a label. So instead of just square feet, it would say ceramic tile or flooring or cable rack or something of that sort. These tools then are where you're going to select the markup from when you're going to place it in your file. Again, different sets can be for different jobs. So your tool sets can be assigned to various profiles. They can show up in some profiles, but not in others. I will show you how that looks. And again, you get a consistent look for your takeoff information. So again, if I were putting in ceramic tile in here, right, I would start with the area tool, maybe, if I wasn't aware of the tool sets, right, and put that in. Now I end up with that value, but I really don't want the text quite that large, and maybe I'd like it to be black. So I would have to now select this, come back into here, and start playing with things. Actually, I'll do it from the top of the screen a little bit as well. So for my font, it's maybe 12 is too big. Maybe I'll drop it down to 9. Maybe I would like it to be black. Maybe I would like the have it say ceramic tile. So up here in the properties for that, I would come over and add a label called ceramic tile. Right? There it is, right? And now, instead of it being area measurement, I have to come in here and start typing in initially ceramic tile, and it can fill in as ceramic tile. But I now need to go in and start looking at hatch patterns. So maybe I will look at a grid pattern in there. But maybe I don't like that particular color. Maybe I'll do that for the color, right? And maybe I don't like that particular color. So I can do that. Maybe that's too dark. So I need to start changing the size as well as changing the fill opacity, right? That's a lot of work to do every single time. So once you get something like this set up, what you're going to want to do is save this as a preset tool. So over here on my left-hand side, I have my little lunchbox or my little tool chest, and I can click on that and it will open up the panel that's called Tool Chest. Now, Tool Chest has a variety of sets in there already, and I have an option to manage tool sets. In the Manage Tool Set dialog box, I have the ability to choose these and say, do I want them to show in all profiles or not? So I could set these up so they will only show in the profile in which they're created. How do you control that? Well, you would select it and you would and choose Modify. And in Modify, you have an option up here at the top to show in all profiles. So you can turn that on or turn that off. By the way, if you have show in all profiles checked, you cannot delete that tool set. So if you ever get frustrated, you would have to first come in here and uncheck that. Okay. Creating a new tool set, I can simply click on Add, and I could add a new tool set. These tool sets are stored locally on your machines, but can be exported and then imported as individual files. So you can create a standard set of tools for the office that can then be passed around. People can then add to those, but at least you will have a set of tools that everyone at least starts with that are identical. So once those are in, what you do is once you've placed a markup in the file, you simply right-click, and towards the bottom of that pop-up menu, there is an option to add to the tool chest. And you can choose whichever open tool chest there is to add that to the tool chest. So I've done that. So instead of my going through all of that, I would simply come over to the tool chest that I have here, select my ceramic tile tool, hold down my left button to drag a rectangular boundary. And when I'm done, it is all pre-configured for me. If I had another space that maybe is going to be carpeting, I would come over and click on my carpeting tool and trace the boundaries. Right? So this will take me a couple of extra seconds. Of course, there's no boundary right there. And I'll go ahead and double click to finish it. And now I get carpeting and I get my value in square yards, right? So down here, things are populating correctly into ceramic tile as well as into carpeting. Costs per square foot have been pre-assigned, but I can come back and adjust those. Costs per square yard have been pre-assigned, but this one is missing. So again, I could double click in there, type in, let's say this one's a little more expensive carpeting, maybe that's $32 a square yard, right? And that will give me my total costs, right? So there's my total square yard cost for that particular item, my total square foot costs. It looks like that guy didn't get a cost for total square foot. Oh, down here, sorry, down here, we get that. Okay, so we get those particular items very, very quickly. By the way, one of the ways to get a final total project cost is to have a neutral column. Now, responsibility may not end up being a neutral column, so you would need one that would be, right? So I don't know, I would choose one up here, maybe called, what should I call it? Oh, I don't know. I'll just pick one for the moment called comments, right? So way at the end of my markup list, I should have now a column, or somewhere I have a column. Oh, comments isn't very, very good. Let's not use comments. That one's not working for me. Responsibility is empty at the moment, so rather than my struggling through to find one that is empty, I'm going to go ahead and close the comments column. Just uncheck that. Responsibility currently is empty, so I would just create a new column that would be an empty column. It wouldn't really be something that would be filled in. So by sorting by subject, each of the individual subjects gets a total, but my total project cost is still broken down to each of those sections. Instead, if I sort by clicking on the word responsibility, and the responsibility, this column is neutral. In other words, it's all the same value. I would get my total project cost now at the top here, $4,718. Okay, so consistency is important. Now, if you had another project, let's say that this one is not necessarily appropriate for that, but let's say you had something where you were doing concrete footings, for example, or concrete columns, for example. Well, you could take that particular tool that you have and you can tell it to put it in exactly the way it was recorded to start with. So let's say I want to do a volume for a particular column. So I could come over to here and I could choose my volume tool, and I could hold down my left button and drag and come over and set the depth of that to, let's say, 10 feet. And I would change, let's get that foot mark out of there. I would go ahead and change the cubic feet to cubic yards. Actually, for that particular tool, I'll change it up here to cubic yards. Well, if I were under volume, it would make more sense. There we go. So 1.48 cubic yards. And, I might want to hatch it and do a couple of other fancy things with it. But I'll come back over to here and I will call this concrete column. Right? And now in my markup list, I would have a concrete column. So I might have more of those that are exactly the same size. So what I would do is come over here, pick that, right click, go over and add that to my tool set. So now it's down here at the bottom. I'll drag that up a bit to here. So now I have that concrete column, and lo and behold, there's another one right there. So with it, the way it's created at the moment, if I click on that, it comes in exactly the same shape as it was originally. Right? So now I can go ahead and add these columns as necessary, but now here's a column that's not the same size. So if I were to click on this and go ahead and place that, right, it's not the right size. That's okay. I can double left click on that tool, and now I go into the ability to draw it dynamically, right? And now I've got it in there at the right size. So you can use these tools if you are placing the same kind of item over and over again. You can simply double click on that particular item and place it exactly the way it was created initially, or you can go ahead and double click and adjust the size. I'm just going to check in. You guys can still hear me? Someone just let me know.
I hear you.
Okay, good. Took a second there. It's like, oh no, no one can hear me. Okay, so that's good. Okay, so this is how you can standardize. And again, you can make adjustments so that different people can have the same tool but different colors. So for instance, Architect's Review, there's a text markup that looks one way, contractor has a different color, engineer has a different color, right? So that you can put these comments in to the same file. Speaking of which, you can work separately at your office, or if your office is a multidiscipline office, the architect, the engineers, contractor might have the design build, contractor might have a separate file. You have the ability in the markup list to go ahead and import markups from other files so that you can go ahead and bring in to a master document all of those comments. These can also be exported to a comma delimited file so that you can manipulate it further, let's say in Excel. But another way to have one central area of what's the right word I'm searching for? Being able to verify that you have a single source of the correct information would be to put your documents online. So I think that brings me to the next topic, which is Bluebeam Studio. Now, the Bluebeam Revu product, every license of Bluebeam Revu gets a copy of Studio, right? Or gets an account with Studio. You will go ahead initially and create an account, right? So you will create an account. Once you've created an account, you will sign in. Bluebeam Studio comes in two different flavors. You have what are called projects, which is this big item over here, this guy here. And you have what are called sessions. So what are the differences between the two? Well, the sessions on the left here are designed to work exclusively with PDF files. So you will create a session, you will upload your PDF documents, and then you can work on them in a collaborative form. So up to 500 people can work on 5,000 documents at the same time. May you have projects that big, but If you don't, that's fine. You can have 3 people working on 10 documents or 1 person working on 2 documents if you want. The idea of collaborating online at the same time is that people can log into that particular studio session, and it will record their comings and their goings, and it will record their markups. And everyone's markups are unique, and as long as the session is kept online, only the person making the markup can edit it. Now, another way to use, and then at the end of a session, you can basically end the session and archive it. So it's a single use. Let's meet. We're going to record what happened, and we then remove it from the servers that Bluebeam is storing it on. By the way, you have unlimited storage, so that's a very nice feature as well. The other thing that you could use it for is a central source of information. So instead of having 3 or 4 files in your office that you then have to consolidate, you can have this one file stored in a studio session that doesn't end. So you can just keep that open as long as you want. And people can open it up and work on it. 2 people, 3 people, 10 people can be working in the same file at the same time. So now you have a single source of truth for that particular project. So those are 2 different ways to use the studio sessions. Now, projects are designed so they can work with any kind of file. So you will be able to set up over here on the lower right all of your folders on the project section of Bluebeam Studio, just like you have them in your office. You can store PDFs, Word documents, AutoCAD drawings, Excel spreadsheets. And as long as you have that file in your, that software in your office on the machine you're on, you'll be able to open that particular document up, but only one person at a time. So collaborating through sessions, being able to work online from anywhere in the world, but one at a time would be projects. So let me show you that. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and close these particular files. And let me take you into Bluebeam Studio. I'm going to go ahead and sign in. And remember your password. It does not remember it for you. So choose wisely, as they said in one of the Indiana Jones movies. Okay, so I'm now in Bluebeam Studio, and here I am in my project. Here are my sessions. Let me show you sessions first. Let me open up collaboration. Right, so here's a collaboration project. This project has 3 files in it, right? So I had uploaded 3 files. From the drop-down under the project, I have settings, and settings will allow me to enable an expiration date or invite attendees or set my permissions. And I can upload files by clicking on the little plus, and I can load files up and in, and anyone else can who has permission. The listing here under record lists me, there's Dan, there's another person in our office, and they set it up so that they logged in. So I can come back, there's Dan joining the session, but I put something on there and said, hey, Dan, look at this. And when I'm zoomed in, if I send a chat down here at the bottom, when Dan clicks on that particular chat, it would take him directly to that particular comment. And if I click on Dan's, right, it says, hey, took me right to Dan's particular comment. Here's another one where he added something, he edited something. See if I can find add contractor, right? So as I click on these markups, I can see them in the file. They also come down here, and I do not have the ability to edit anyone except me, right? So I can edit me, but I can't edit anyone else. I can work in the file as I go and place something in this particular file. Let's say I choose to put a cloud markup in, right? I'll go ahead and do that. That cloud markup now immediately goes into the file. So there it is. Maybe I need to go out in the field, take a picture of something. I can temporarily disconnect. So I'm not hopping out of the session, but I'm going to disconnect up here on the upper left, say, yep, I'm working offline. This time I come over here and say I've got a comment to make there. Over in pending, there's my cloud that I added, but it's waiting until I get back into the office or the trailer out in the field and click to reconnect. I'm now online. That now gets recorded in the session. Again, at the end of a session, you have the ability to choose the hamburger icon over here on the chat bar and go ahead and record, basically have a copy of that session, and it can include all the files as well. I'm going to leave the session open, so I'm just going to hop out of that particular session, and let me show you projects briefly. So again, work sort of the same way. You can create a new project by clicking on the plus and then giving it a name and assigning values to it. So let me open up the Oval Office building project. And you'll notice that again, from the drop down for my project, actually it'll be over in settings here. In my settings for the project, I have, again, the general information. I can control user access, I can control permissions, I can control folder permissions as well. The folders that I set up, I can create as many or as few as I want. I can have PDFs up there for my specifications. I can have Word documents in there. I can have CSV files, DWG files, all kinds of different files. Now, if I go to open a file by double clicking it, or not, I got a message somewhere. Open in split view. I'll just open it up. Right? This file currently has a lock on it because I didn't check it out. So someone else might have had it open. If they don't, I can click on the lock at this point and choose checkout. Right? So now that's checked out. That means anyone else that comes in to access that file, it's checked out. There's a little checked out mark on there. It's locked. I can come in. I could go ahead and put another markup in here. I'll just do something like this and put that in there, and I'll type in VIF, right? And I'll go ahead and close that. It'll say, do you want to save that? I'll say, sure, go ahead and save that. Do I want to put a comment in there? Is it a minor version, revision, or a major revision? I can update my server copy back in the office, and I'll go ahead and say check in. So it goes ahead and checks that back in, and we'll remove the lock. Now, one of the really nice features about this compared to storing it in your office, and again, depending on your particular file structure and software in your office, I can right-click on any of these files, and towards the bottom of the pop-up menu is something called revision history. And I will have all of the histories of this file, all the revisions. I can click on any previous revision and tell it to open that revision. So I can go back in time to every single time this was worked on. I have a copy of that. Pretty valuable, I think. Okay, so that's your kind of big overview of studio sessions and projects. And there are lots of other ways to set this up. There's something called Studio Prime if you're going to really be leveraging this in a major fashion. But for now, that hopefully gives you a flavor of how the Studio product works. I'm going to hop out of Studio, sign out, and I'll go ahead and just reopen a file. By the way, the File Access tab is pretty useful. Because what you can do is files that you've opened up, you can right-click on and pin them. And you can pin them into either into just a general folder, right? Or you can create a category. So if you just pin the file, what it's going to do, pin it into the original folder that it's found in. But you can create these categories so that you can set up different kinds of projects depending on your office. So here's one that I have for my demo, and I can simply click on that file and very quickly find it and reopen it. And the reason you want to do pinning is you'll notice that the recent files here, if I right click on that, it's getting kind of messy. So I'm going to say clear the records and say, yeah, and boom, that's empty at this point. Okay, so the last thing I think I want to show you is the Bluebeam Revu configuration editor. And I'm not going to take you through all the steps. I did that in the webinar on what's new in Revu 2019. So I think that's online. And because we record these and store them online. So what's new in Bluebeam Revu 2019 will show you where to find this. But you can download it and use it for setting up a deployment and setting it up so you can place it on one machine or on 100 or 1,000. Now, in the past, what you had to do was almost become a certified consultant. So to become a certified consultant, I had to know what a lot of this bizarre jargon over here on the left did on the right. And you would have to create a file that was in a particular software program that you had to download. And if you didn't put everything in correctly, the commas and the dashes, you basically foobarred the process. That's the technical term for not doing it correctly. In the new configuration, you have the ability to run an executable file. There is an MSI file that comes with that as a starting point, and you can very quickly, in normal English, figure out what variables you want. So I'm going to take you through that here right now. So let me show you how that works. Let me bring up this guy here. So I have the executable. I'll go ahead and start that. And here we go. There's my executable. So here's my executable. I'm going to be creating a new deployment. I'll click on that. It wants my MSI file. I'll go back to that particular folder. There's my MSI file. I can open that up. It wants a deployment folder. I'll go ahead and tell it that I'll put it in that same folder that I was working in. It's going to take a second to wake up. Let me come down to my sales tools and Bluebeam Revu. Okay. I will go ahead and pick next. I'm going to use it as a trial, so I'm not going to put in serial number or product key. Next. And now I can decide, do I want to authorize it right away or do I want to delay that? Do I want to enable a welcome page or not? Right? Next. You get the idea, right? You can comb through here and make all of these settings. And when you're finally done, you will be ready to create. I'm not actually going to create it, so I'll go ahead and go back to the X and say, I don't want to save it. But you don't have to be a programmer now to be able to configure Bluebeam for deployment.